What's up, soldiers? Thanks for joining me on today's video. We're going to be talking about how to train for strongman in a regular commercial gym. So even if you don't have access to all the implements that strongman requires, you can still be a good strongman athlete and nail down the fundamentals of the sport. So whether you do want to compete in competitions or just kind of have those elements of really good high-level functional strength, we're going to talk about how to do that exactly without those strongman implements. So before we get started, please like the video, click subscribe to the channel, and for more things to help you become a better strongman, check out my private community, clubstrongman.com. All right, so when we're talking about what's needed in strongman, there's really a handful of different movement patterns that we have to be good at. So before we get into detail, just kind of lift them off. You have to be able to press, load, explode, carry, deadlift, pick things up off the ground. You need to be able to do medleys and combine different things. You have to have good grip strength, and you need to be able to squat and have good leg power, right? So let's just kind of break into, the press to start off. Most places you're going to have access to dumbbells, and hopefully if you want to replicate a log bar, you might have a Swiss or what's sometimes called a football bar. So when you're thinking about what you need to be able to do, while there's a lot of technique involved in pressing those certain implements, you're not going to be able to do very well with it if you don't have a pretty good level of strength. So you should have a decent foundation with a strict press, okay? That's just a normal barbell overhead press. Now, when we're thinking about more specific things, again, like the log, we can try to use a Swiss bar if we have access to it to mimic that hand position that we're going to be in. And then with things like the circus dumbbell, we can use dumbbells or kettlebells to mimic that to a degree. Now, remember, it's not always going to be perfect, but we're talking about how we nail down these movement patterns that we're going to use for the events. So one thing that works really well, just like a little tip, is to use fat grips on things like dumbbells, because then you can get used to the thicker handles that some of these implements are going to require. Same with putting those on a barbell. You're getting used to an axle press, although the clean is really difficult in its own right. If you have a good power clean, if you have good explosive hips, you'll be able to get a decent amount of weight up, and then you'll be used to pressing overhead with a thicker handle if you just invest in a set of $20 fat grips. Pretty easy, can go right in your gym bag. Now there's other things you can do, like for that circus dumbbell, like windmills and a bench press, that really work your stability for those overhead positions. So think about, again, right technical positions and right movement patterns, and max those out kind of as much as you can with the movements provided. But if you're doing things like following a good solid training program which develops strength, you're going to do pretty well at the end of the day, right? And now what you want to do is, if you do want to become a better athlete but you don't have access to all those things, try to find regular opportunities to go to these competitions, even if you're not training like 100% out to like win that thing or do, the best you can do. Try to just find whatever opportunities you can to get experience on these things. That might take even taking an hour or two road trip once a month to a strongman gym where you can get hands on the implements. But again, you don't have to do that. Going in, I combined load and explode. So this is really just like a hip extension movement. Loading is where we're putting a stone, sandbag, or keg or anything heavy either up and over an object or onto our shoulder, right? So this is the same thing heavy as an explosive throw movement is. It's all hip extension. So whether we're, throwing a bag or a keg up, or we're loading a stone, we're training strong, powerful triple extension, popping up on the toes, extending the knees, extending the hips, and getting tall. So we want to be able to train these, again, powerfully and heavy. So this is a good way to start, though. You typically want a good nervous system activation movement to lead into your strength work, just to excite your system and get what's called post-activation potentiation. So you're gonna wake your body up to its highest potential that the nervous system can fire by doing things like explosive jumps, sprints, and power cleans, all right? Now, power cleans are one, I kind of wrote it twice here, because cleans can be heavy, and they can be light and powerful. Clean always should have an element of power, but of course, percentage wise, if you can power clean 275, you can also do it at 135, just with a lot of emphasis on really driving for speed. Okay. Now back to load. Again, it's all about that hip extension. So think about, certain movements, like just like a hip thrust where you have your back on the bench and you have to extend up either with like bands or barbells. Like that's forcing you to have to move in that position powerfully. So if you're laying on your back or standing up, it's still the same muscle groups that are firing. So how can you train that? Again, hip thrusts are a good one, but also Zerchers are probably one of the best, if not the best move you can do in a normal commercial gym to practice loading. That's where we have a barbell out in front and we're loading down. So think about if you're going to squat a barbell like this over and over and you have to load a sandbag or a stone, it's just a little different hand position, but that's still going to force you to get used to bracing with your arms, keeping your chest lifted, and bracing through your upper back as you would with a stone, sandbag, keg, any of that stuff. So press, load, explode. Next, carry. So let's kind of jump real quick since we just talked about Zerchers. Zercher marches are a good one. You might not have room to carry an object down and back like in your gym. So what you can do is mimic that with a march in place in a Zercher position, okay? So that would be getting you used to having to take quick steps while holding weight, which again transfers over to same thing if you're just gonna have to be moving 50 feet or 100 feet with that. Now, sometimes if you're able to, you can rig up a couple plates, you can squeeze them tight together and actually carry those, or also perform that march technique. And same thing with farmers. You might have access to a trap bar or just heavy enough dumbbells to where you can get a good stimulus to carry those. Now consider if you don't have something that you can load up heavy enough to just lengthen the workload and increase your volume. So let's say you only have like 100-pound dumbbells and your competition potentially even works up to like 200 pounds per hand on a farmer's carry. What you'd want to do is like strengthen your grip and back with things like normal deadlift, and then maybe throw some fat grips on those 100-pound dumbbells and perform your farmer's carries then to really further work your grip, work your posture, and work your technique for the farmer's movement just in a lighter, faster way, okay? So deadlift should always be in your program, kind of no matter what you're doing for strength. Think about the different areas you could target. Like RDLs are really good for loading, especially when we're picking things off the ground, like a stone. When we're moving that off the ground, it's actually a hip hinge movement, not a squat. So we're loading here, not like this. So training a lot of RDLs on top of your barbell deadlifts or trap bar deadlifts are a really good thing that you should be adding in. Of course, you can do that with dumbbells as well, if you so choose. Now, moving into things like medleys, this you should just kind of consider as your conditioning work. Medleys are often won by who's doing this the fastest and not necessarily who is the strongest, right? That's kind of where you get that speed element in strongman. So how can you combine like a lot of these different things that we're doing into one to make it a pretty powerful conditioning movement? Now, while there are sleds in a lot of different strongman events, I think you should try to work these in regularly just because they're such a phenomenal conditioning tool. And you can use some things like this to pre-fatigue your legs before you go into a Zercher march or a farmer's carry, so that if you have like a sandbag carry for something like max distance, train when you're already in a little bit of a fatigued state so that you get a greater training response to that stimulus, right? So really just think about how can you combine these things, use things like time caps or time targets to improve your conditioning week in, week out. And then moving along, you have to have a good grip. So we've talked about using the fat grips, talked about farmer's walks, things like that. But any sort of hangs that you're going to have to do, like a dead hang, not only is that going to be really good to stretch out and loosen up your chest, shoulders, lats, back, but it's just a grip challenge. So use things like that in your training, as well as holds. You can just stand and hold that barbell in place to strengthen your grip. Okay, pretty straightforward. Lastly, squats, you're always going to need some element of leg power. I would just say my kind of 4 favorite ways to train for squats are a high bar squat, a front squat, safety bar squat, and a Bulgarian squat. And let's just differentiate. These are a lot more quad loaded movement. Okay, now this low bar powerlifting style squat that has a little bit more of that like fold forward where like your hamstrings and glutes get a little bit more engaged, but we need to load the weight a little further forward on our center of gravity, which just means that, for all those events where the weight's out in front, like loading or the log or things like the dip in a log, the dip in any sort of press, we're really reinforcing that movement with like the high bar squat and the front squat. So that's why I like to recommend these. And Bulgarians, in my opinion, are just such a good bang for your buck movement. That's the single leg elevated foot up on a set of plates or a bench here. And what's good about this is you do not need as much weight in order to get greater activation. It's a single leg exercise. So if you can have like a max squat of 500 pounds, you're going to get an amazing training stimulus by only having to hold like 150 or 200, whether that's at your sides or on your back. So use your resources like that. You could also do a similar thing with like one-legged RDLs if you're limited in weight, okay? So as we're thinking about all of these, if you're going into a competition, just think about like what combination and what positions are mimicking like what you need to do, okay? So mimic the moving patterns, right? Are you doing a log press? Try to work in some element of a neutral grip press. This could be like an incline press on a bench. This could even be dips to some degree, or that Swiss bar. Just really try to lock that in. And if you don't have either of those, okay, load up your barbell. Just get to work pressing it. Build your strength as much as you can. You always need to focus first on your strength and conditioning. If you're not using those event-specific objects regularly, you can always have a lot of success with a brutally strong base. Many times at strongman competitions, it is the strongest person that wins, not the person that has all the access to all the equipment. We all know a lot of people that train out of their garage gym where they've got every piece of equipment that's never won a show. That's the reality of the situation. It just happens, okay? Now, with this, I would dial back your accessories as you get closer to an event and then just really continue to work those like higher end levels of strength. So if you're tapering and doing a program properly, your intensity should be going up and your volume should be dropped appropriately or manipulated appropriately to where you can peak. It's not really the time to focus on a lot of like glorified like bodybuilding accessories or certain things that are just not necessary, because all of this strongman stuff are big full body movements. So think about how you can maximize the big full body moves with things like medleys or just big compound lifts from any of these movement patterns, right? Now, on top of that, I think it's really important to just do a lot of heavy core and stability work all the time. Strongman is really founded on odd objects, which means your body is in less than perfect conditions. It's never perfect in lifting, but like barbells sit on your chest and your shoulders like really nicely most of the time, but like an axle bar sits out in front of you. A log sits out in front of you. So you need to make sure that you're doing plenty of good core work to prevent, getting this sort of crunch in position. I really like things like cable crunches or even sit-ups, weighted knee raises. A lot of stuff like that would be really great to do if you're not doing event-specific objects, right? Now, stability work too. We need to use the same principles we were talking about why we want the heavy core work. A lot of these are odd objects, especially things like circus dumbbells, farmer's handles that could turn around. So always be working some stability through things, through your hips. You can do that with Bulgarian squats. That's giving you stability through single leg work. RDLs, if you do that single leg, could give you stability. Single arm dumbbell presses could do that. Like banded chaos presses could do that to really drill your shoulders in, but also those like kettlebell movements as well. Things like Turkish get-ups, which will train your whole body head to toe while you're holding that weight up, are excellent for full body stability and core strength. So there's really a lot of different ways to attack this, but I hope this gives you some ideas. If you're in a regular commercial gym, corporate gym, like whatever like that, you are not stuck. You actually have a lot of options It's just going to take some creativity, and desire to get stronger in order to get better. Now, above everything, always, you need to be following a program and a routine. So make sure you are following a sensible plan where you're going to be overlapping these movement patterns in a way that allows you to advance the weights and get better and stronger over long periods of time in order to display that top level strength that you need as a strongman. So if you're interested in more strongman stuff, please check out my private community at clubstrongman.com. We've got training programs in there, educational courses, technique tutorials, and some private guest Q&As exclusive for the community. That's at clubstrongman.com. Thank you so much for watching and have a championship day.